Welcome to Cultural Connections Lab. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Forbes. We are here to talk with educational professionals around the world to impact and influence the education system as we focus on cultural connections and the education of multilingual, diverse students. We're excited to have you join us today, and we sincerely hope that you enjoy the show.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. This was our very first time to do the Cultural Connections Lab at the Oklahoma Association for Bilingual Education. And the rationale behind that was, one, to spread more awareness about culture, the role it plays in what we do in our careers and our fields, how that impacts how we move forward, but also just to bring some awareness to the association, to OABE. But again, I'm really glad to have you here, Dr. Paul Parkerson, and just introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Yes,
and tell our listeners who you are.
Thank you. Yeah, I know it's great to be here. I heard about the conference and it piqued my interest because I live in Texas. I teach in Texas, work in Texas, but the knowledge I have of what Oklahoma has in terms of multiple languages, a bilingual educators conference just sounded really interesting, so it intrigued me. I think I mentioned to you it piqued my interest, and so I kind of threw my name in the hat to see, well, let's see if they'll, and so you guys said, yeah, why don't you come on out? So it's already, we've had several, like a breakout session and then a panel, and it's been a lot of fun. Very good.
Well, I'm really glad that you are here. I feel like, as I had just mentioned earlier in the panel discussion that we had, like Socrates, like the more that you dig down into this, like the more you know, the more you know nothing. But through all of that, the one thing that I really have feel like I'm most connect to, and no pun on the title of the podcast, but it really are like those cultural connections, the way that culture is celebrated, is understood in what we do, not just for academics and just for language learning, but way after pre-K 12, way after the university. So do you mind speaking just a little bit about how has culture impacted you? What role has culture played in maybe your own personal life, and
Absolutely.
then how that translates over into what we do for our students?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because it's so vast, frankly. But I grew up in another culture, and I think I grew up in Spain, but I went to high school, finished high school and college in the United States, and they have a name for us. There for a while it was trendy. They called us third culture kids. Okay. And it's a whole thing. But regardless, I always felt like I was just sort of an alien. Like I don't really fit here. I don't fit here. And when I was in grad school, I started reading a little bit about Gloria Anzaldúa and her whole Borderlands thing. Anyway, culture is huge. It is tied to our identity, and I think we all agree that that's just such an integral part of any relationship. So if you're talking about friendship, culture is a part of that. If you're talking about family, culture is a part of that. And so then when we come into talking about education, then of course, instructor, educator, student, the entire learning space is a social cultural event that, so to not include that in any conversation would be nonsensical. Yeah. So I think that, and so as we talk about that, the importance of being, being culturally responsive, being culturally competent, that's sort of a given. It's almost like teaching 101, education 101. And then when you start talking about multilingualism, bilingualism, anything of that nature, the culture gets even more rich in the context of why that's important. It's important just because, but then when you start adding language to it, when you start adding sociocultural components, and connecting those, oh my goodness, it's just something. I think it's why I was so attracted to education because of my background, because it was a way to mesh all of this stuff. And frankly, I'm a people person, and so I love learning about other people. Well, why do you speak that language? Or why do you eat with those?
Yeah.
And what is that? And traveling and having been exposed to the world is a huge place, you realize there's just so much to take in. And so I think I tell my students many times, we're curious about things together, so let's learn together. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, totally 100%. And so I mean, that right there was a big theme that really came up, was the teacher, the professor, el docente aprendiendo también con los estudiantes, like learning with the students at the same time from each other. One thing though that I always like to share and be vulnerable, because if I'm not vulnerable, then I don't feel like any of the listeners or anyone, or it's not real, right?
I love it.
But I know that people often see me and they're always surprised, like, oh, you speak Spanish? Because they just assume the blonde haired, spiky, spiky hair guy, probably the blue eyes, doesn't speak any Spanish. I learned Spanish because of going to high school, because of Senora Atkins, because of an amazing teacher, and was just fortunate to have the support, the family, the resources to acquire another language. The vulnerable part is that I had made an assumption about you and from where you might be from and your background based on how you look. And so I'm glad that I did, because every time that happens, like the second that you do that, I remember, don't assume anything, right?
Yes.
And so then immediately you were explaining that your background of living in Costa Rica and in Spain, in España, and the life that you've lived. I think it's important for us as educators to make sure that we're constantly asking ourselves, am I making assumptions?
Yes.
How does that impacting what I'm doing? But do you want to speak to that? Does that happen?
Absolutely.
Does that happen to you often? Like it happens to me. Like they're like, "Oh, you speak Spanish?"
I'm glad that you're being vulnerable about it. The friends that know my story know me, and they tell me that I'm un coco al revés. I'm, white outside, brown inside, and whatever that means. But the point is, I always have had that happen. That's part of my story. And so I remember once I had a student, and he said, "Yeah, after I met you, Mr. Parkerson, I went home, le dije a mi mamá, mamá, mi maestro es un bolillo, pero habla español." And I was like, what's a bolillo? And so I had to learn what that was, because I never even heard of it. Turns out it's white bread. Anyway, that's just part of my story. And so but I think you're so right, that vulnerability of not assuming that because somebody looks a certain way, speaks a certain way, moves a certain way, the outer trappings, of course it's how we use, how we navigate life. We have to make some assumptions to start, but I think it's that intentionality of being willing to go, oh, it's not at all what I thought.
Yeah.
And then, especially in those learning spaces with our students, learning that, because I remember I had a student in a class once that I believe it was a 4th grade class, and a big percentage of my students were from Mexico, and it took several months for us to get to a point where we were talking about pupusas, and he said, well, I know what do you know what a pupusa is? And it turned out he was from Honduras, and not from Mexico.
I see.
But he wanted to say, and so we I think sometimes feel compelled to, not volunteer too much, but I think that it's important. I think a good teacher is separated from a great teacher in many ways by that willingness to be vulnerable. I think that that's a key element there.
It's uncomfortable.
It is.
But the more that you practice it, it becomes like addicting to constantly want to like.
Well, like you said, you feel like it's not real if you're not. Because
I think
then
that's what
you're
it is.
I think you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, like I said, a lot of people, whether it be linguistically, because of my background, from where I might be, et cetera, like they also have their own stereotypes or assumptions and things like that. But I think it's just a good place for us to kind of stop and then reflect upon all of the assets that you're bringing, that had I not been able to have this conversation with you, have a new friend in you, but to be able to know that you bring so much more to this conversation than what I had assumed. And so if we have that same practice with, as I always call them, the best professors that we have are our students, and we have that open communication, I think that really helps build cultural proficiency, which is the goal, right?
Absolutely, and I think that cultural proficiency, if there's one thing I could say that maybe I've learned up through this journey, is that the only thing that's consistent about all these multilingual and multicultural learners that I've had the privilege of meeting is that there's nothing consistent about it. The diversity is just off the charts. And just when you feel like you're getting comfortable enough to maybe make some assumptions, boom, it gets blown out.
Yeah.
So that's
Isn't that fun?
It makes it a lot more interesting. I think it's it keeps my interest. It's what helps me stay the course.
All of this right here. So I want to make sure I get the name correct. You're about to present a session here at the conference, and your session is titled "Using Bilingual Anticipatory Guides in Multilingual Learning Spaces."
Correct.
I'm excited for the participants here at the conference to go to that. So do you want to share a little bit about like a little preview what that's going to be about?
Absolutely.
And what role does culture play in that even?
It's interesting because I think culture is part of it for sure, but this is actually geared more towards the classroom teacher because it's something that I've been very interested in, and I've sort of researched in the classroom for over a decade, just trying different permutations, trying it, using the students become your guinea pigs, and you just try different things, and then seeing what sort of works, what doesn't work, what works better. And of course we all know that there's so many moving parts and variables. What works with one group of students may not work with another group. But regardless, the idea is to focus on the culture and specifically the language and the linguistic repertoire that the students have to help leverage reading comprehension.
Okay.
And so the strategy that I use is and I'm not a huge fan of standing and talking. I prefer that we do something. So it's focused on here's an example of some materials, and we do it together, so that the people that are in the breakout session get a chance to see how it works. Yay or nay, I may want to use this in my classroom, and then have something they can take back and try out in their learning space.
Okay, I like that so much. Another shout out to my mother. I did this last time too. I don't mean to intentionally, but she does not work in education. Her only background in education is going to school and me. But whenever she listens to the podcast, she always talks about how this can branch off into any other place, any other organization, a company, etc. But whenever you talk about specifically for teachers, for principals, for professional development, or for leaders that are working in a plasma center, for example, that are still working with people from a vast variety of backgrounds, etc. What recommendations do you have for them to make their faculty meeting, or that meeting after school that really could have been an email actually? Like, how do you make that more engaging in the same way that you're about to present a session? Because I feel like oftentimes, and maybe this isn't your experience, but you go to the meeting after school and like sometimes the people are falling asleep.
Oh yes.
Or
yes.
I always think about like a sheltered instruction activity, like use that activity to get the point across in your faculty meetings. Now you're showing the pedagogical practice, but still getting the point across.
Well, the interesting thing is right now I'm very fortunate to have one foot in an actual elementary school classrooms setting with elementary kids, and I'm also adjunct teaching, so I have the opportunity to work with pre-service teachers.
Nice.
So I get that whole continuum.
Yeah.
But if there's one thing that, like you said, I noticed that's consistent, what do the students want at an elementary, in an elementary context? They want something that's engaging, motivating, fun, that piques their interest, that is, oh wow, what are we doing? And then going on into the university, these pre-service teachers, these students that are going to become teachers, what do they want? They don't want me to talk about theory and, well, in a classroom, let me show you a video. They want to do something that they would probably be doing in a classroom.
Right.
And so I think that so much of education is, I mean, who was it, Vygotsky, that did so much research with mothers and children. I think that didactic side of education is simply that, doing things. Doing something like, okay, let's learn how to make pancakes. How do you mix the stuff to make the batter? Not just I'm going to tell you about it, but let's do it and then make the pancakes and then eat the pancakes.
Yeah.
So I think that ties back to being real and being vulnerable. It needs to be pragmatic. It needs to be something substantive, not just this pie in the sky theory that's been researched and proven and blah, 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 but actually let's do it.
You actually do it.
Yes.
Like real life.
Agreed, yes.
Applicable. I'm curious, if anything, what's the biggest takeaway that you're seeing from the elementary school setting all the way to the adults? Things like connections that you're making automatically, like, oh, okay, wow.
Probably
because education's been changing and
absolutely
evolving.
Probably the biggest one is that we don't practice what we preach.
Ooh.
Because we sit there and tell our pre-service teachers, now the least effective mode of education is for one person to speak while others sit and listen.
On the stage.
While you are speaking to them sitting. And that just screams irony. Like, then why are we doing that? We should be doing something different. This classroom shouldn't be tables with students taking notes while I talk and my PowerPoint slides. It should be a lab.
Yeah.
It should be like a cooking show. You know what I mean? I mean, it should be like a classroom. And okay, guys, so I don't know. I have a lot of. My wife tells me I'm still in the honeymoon stage, but I have a lot of ideas with the way I think things could change. So yeah.
Do the pre-service teachers that you currently are working with right now, are they coming from multicultural, multilinguistic backgrounds themselves? And what's that been like for your own learning?
They are, and what's very interesting is many of them want to be bilingual teachers. Some of them started out wanting to be bilingual teachers, but then when confronted with the testing requirements in the state of Texas become more, I think I'll be an ESL teacher. And then others have no interest in or are not bilingual. So there's this whole gamut of students that want to be teachers. But yes, they come from very diverse backgrounds, multicultural settings, but the thing that they all have in common, and it's what literally like charges my batteries as a teacher, because I'm like, why do you want to be teachers? And they're all like, well, we're for the money, clearly. No,
clearly,
I'm just kidding.
And the fame and the fortune,
yeah, exactly.
Right, all of that.
No, but they all tell me the same thing. I want to help kids. I want to change the world. And it sounds so idealistic and so Pollyanna, but it makes me want to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
you said something that made me consider something that I really hadn't considered before, that they didn't want to necessarily teach a certain content area or a certain grade because it might be tested. So then therefore I'll do this instead, which is so interesting whenever you consider, like I had mentioned before whenever we were on the panel, that so in Texas you have TELPAS, here we have WIDA, but you probably have the TELPAS standards and you would have your academic standards. Yeah, the ELFs, exactly. But then the content area teacher very well may not have that. So just in your comment alone, it just goes to show like we categorize these in these silos so much, like, okay, so
Absolutely.
You're the tested and then you're the language development teacher, and so the professional development is going to be this for you to meet that goal and this for you, but never the two shall meet normally.
Exactly, and I mean, if at the risk of sounding I don't know what, we use the term desegregating, we use the term decolonizing, we use the term deconstructing, and yet why is it that we have to really immerse ourselves in those practices in education? It's because education has become so compartmentalized. And it's like somebody said in the panel, your PD becomes, oh no, there's just another thing I gotta do as a teacher. And I mean, trust me, any generalist, the list of things they have to do, wow. I mean, bilingual teacher, yes, tack on more. there are so many things that you have to do. But at the same time, I think that's what I love about being able to work with these pre-service teachers, is have that conversation of, why do you want to do it? Because if you really aren't sure, now's the time to make that decision, because it's not about the money or the fame or the whatever. It's about something that really means something to you at your core.
Yeah.
And I think that is the energy that drives that. Otherwise, I think you'll fall short.
I think it's as simple as like, what does it make you feel?
Yeah.
I mean, truly, like whenever you get up in the morning, and are you so excited that you can't wait to go do this?
That's right.
Knowing there's going to be struggle. I mean, knowing some of the obvious.
Absolutely.
But do I get up every day with that joy and that excitement?
Yeah.
And maybe not every day, but most of those days should feel that way. And if they don't,
enough to keep you employed, right?
Yes,
right.
Definitely. And it's so funny that how that's just the conversation about, well, these are testing groups. I mean, like, everyone's a reading teacher, everyone's an ELD teacher, everyone's a tested whatever, because it all connects. And so
That's right.
I feel like the more that we continue to categorize and separate all of this, as opposed to really thinking about this holistically, and how this is really a benefit for all students, and that there was someone like me who was never supposed to be bilingual or multicultural or any of that. It's because of the exposure that I had.
Yeah.
So if we expose those conversations to everyone and start to change that dialogue, our perspectives from deficit to very asset-based, enhancing the celebration of the cultures represented.
Absolutely. I think that speaks to, being more of a global citizen. Like everybody talks about that. I think that's what that means. It's awareness of this giant world we live in, and how we can integrate that and not be so.
And in the care, though, that like what I'm doing over here is inadvertently going to impact the other side of the globe. I mean, because we're all on this planet truly together, and you can bring that focus into a school setting, a district, a community at large, and really start to impact how you're, again, serving others. I think that's a really important role. What role do leaders play in this, and how we have a lot of leaders that are really good at this and like take time to help raise awareness and the understanding of the superpower of multilingualism and what that really does mean cognitively for your brain. But then we have other leaders who don't necessarily understand or know or maybe have that exposure, because there might be just a few of those students. And so I'm going to focus on the majority and give some support for the other students. How do we change that conversation, and what role do leaders play in that and can or could play in that?
I mean,
it might be a loaded question too. I don't know.
I think it is, but I mean, I think I think it was you that said it during the panel discussion, the idea of who's here versus who's not here. Who are we seeing versus who are we not seeing? And I think that's an important part of the conversation, simply from what is the purpose behind it. But I come from the school of thought. I believe that leaders have more responsibility. And so when you have, what is the saying in all the movies with the superheroes, use your superpowers for good, not for evil. Right. And with great responsibility or with great whatever
comes great responsibility.
And that notion of being responsible with whatever it is, decision making, looking, having vision, envisioning, but also being intentional. But I think that the leaders I admire the most are the ones that listen more than they speak. And I say that as a person that loves to talk. So, I was always told, Dios te dio dos oídos y una boca. So you should, talk
only 2 ears and one mouth.
As much as you listen, So, but I think that's the, a sign of a good leader, is listening.
Yeah, I think it's really important for that. I am constant work in progress. There are times whenever I feel like maybe I've done better today than I had expected, and then there are days when I think, golly, you didn't even get close to the mark, Kelly. or I find myself back and forth on this continuum of cultural proficiency where I feel like it's culturally proficient, but because of my lack of understanding or awareness, I was kind of destructive in a moment and I didn't even intend to or mean to. So I always encourage other professionals with whom I work that it's good to have grace and compassion for ourselves. But at the same time, though, if you are a leader, to hold yourself to that higher level of responsibility to make sure that you're not doing anything that would be considered destructive, whether that be a policy, whether that be even just among the teachers, not even among necessarily just the students that you have, but even teachers that you have. And so in some trainings that I've been able to go to and work with teachers, we were in the group setting and it was fun that they found out 2 different times and 2 different locations that another teacher was bilingual and no one knew it.
Oh, wow.
It had never even been discussed. And I think it's because it probably wasn't Spanish, was the other language. Which again was a reflection for me because being bilingual in those 2 languages, I often revert back to comparisons in those 2 because that's what I know. But I try to make other, connections across that as well.
Sure.
Do you have any experiences?
Oh, absolutely.
Like that you want to share? Because I feel like
I think those blind spots exist for everybody, and I think that's part of. You might say that's part of our should be part of our routine to be reflexive and think about what is it that I'm not seeing, what is it that I'm ignoring, because I think that's the worst. When you find that you've made a mistake because you didn't know. And a lot of times, why did you not know? Well, you didn't ask. And I've seen that happen to me in the classroom, like my student that was from a different Spanish-speaking country. If I had probed a little further sooner, I would have known that. And you can rationalize that and say, well, he was very quiet about it, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, I should always be intentional in that sense of always thinking about that. What is it that I'm leaving out? What is it that I'm maybe not seeing? And so I think that's why that practice of being reflexive is so important. I think that we all agree, I think educators all agree that's an important part of the practice. How did it go today? What and think about that. Okay, he said that. She looked this way. We said this. We did this. How did that go? And thinking and taking the time. And a lot of times it's boom, 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 boom. And you have to take that time to do that. And then based on what the feedback you give yourself, what am I going to do with that?
Yeah. What do I do now? And now
what? But having grace for yourself, yes. Having also, I think, grace for others, but yes, and because I think when you fall into that trap of not being graceful with yourself, you can crash and burn, and then kind of want to give up.
I've had that day.
Right.
Yeah,
I think we all have multiple times, but but I think that's also part of the model of pedagogy that is effective, that the teacher and the learner, I think Freire is the one that said it, it being dialogic in that sense of the learner is also the teacher and the teacher is also the learner. There's a constant dialogue. So I made a mistake. See, you made a mistake. We all make mistakes.
Yes.
That's how we learn.
It makes me think about the TED Talk from Rita Pearson.
Oh, yes.
Have you ever said you're sorry to a kid before and they look at you like they just can't even believe the fact that you were sorry?
Well, and I mean, let's be honest. When you've overcome so many obstacles to become a first-year teacher, that first year in the classroom, you've got the power, man. You've got, you have some authority, some modicum of authority, and it's hard to relinquish that and go, whoa. But that's ahí está la gracia.
That's exactly where that grace is. I talk a lot about individual student understanding and how important that is, as much as we can to know our students. I know that looks very differently for different teachers, for different reasons based on what they're teaching, classroom sizes, etc. But I think though the more that we can try to do that, and of course individual student understanding, that can be incorporated in your language arts class and in any classroom that you're doing that connects to a standard. So it's not like you have to pause take time out because we're already worried about time already. But really being able to have some sort of a space where we do get to know the students, because now that I get to know you more, it's going to, like, now that I'm just getting to know you just right now in these short minutes that we've been together, if you were my student and I were the teacher, I know that tomorrow I could have a better lesson for you, connecting back to Spain and to Costa Rica, and also to the language Spanish that you also speak, and maybe connect that to a historical setting that will make this U.S. history class a little bit easier for you to understand.
Absolutely. I think that foundation, I mean, it's all relational. And, you know, the longer time passes, relationships grow, but they have to be invested in, and they're based on what you learn and what you know, the exchange, the interconnectedness, if you will. So, I think that I like to say, after spending a year with a student, hopefully that student has my fingerprints all over him.
Yes.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
Because you, as a teacher, you're going to walk on, and you know there's that student that stands out in your mind from X amount of years ago, and you use that to guide your practice.
Because you yourself are changing. You yourself should be evolving through this.
We don't want to fossilize.
Nope. No. I really appreciate you being here at the conference. I appreciate that you're going to share some awesome information that I really can't wait for Oklahomans to learn more from yourself. But you continue to come back, and I hope that we can go and visit
a little cross-pollination.
you. No, for real. I think it's really, there's a lot of power in that, and so I appreciate you. But I would like to give you just the last word of anything that you maybe have learned or a takeaway or something that is just really important to you. That you would like to share with any listener out there who most likely is in the field of education, but also could be in any field, but knowing that culture is playing a role in what they do every day, and most importantly within themselves overall. But is there anything just from your experiences you would like to share?
You know, I'm sort of gushing already, but coming to a new place with new people that I've never met before, that I don't know, but that have like minds to me, in that culture is important, respect and the importance of maintaining humanity in education is so evident, and it gives me faith that I believe in education. I believe in working together, and so it's no surprise that here I am, you know, with bunch of complete strangers, and I love it. I feel part of it, and I feel like we're on the same page, and it's encouraging me. I'm going to go back to my own habitus, and I'm going to be like, man, that felt really good.
This is where we fill our cups up again.
Yes. I had a principal, my first principal, and I remember he said, you know, teachers start out with a basket full of apples. And you're handing out, you know, and I remember a first year teacher, I was kind of rolling my eyes like, oh gosh, the apple analogy, really? Come on. But he got to this point in the conversation where he said, one day the teacher realizes the basket is empty. And that's a dangerous place. He said, you have to find a way to fill that basket up again. And he looked at me and he was like, you know, Parkerson, different teachers fill their baskets in different ways, but you got to find a way to fill it. And I remember kind of dismissing it at the time, going, oh, thank you. But as I've thought about it over the years, oh my gosh, a teacher with no apples in their basket is a liability. And so I guess that to say, coming here has filled my basket up again, so I can go back and give out some more apples.
I think it's a great thing in education, but I think specifically there's just a special something about multicultural, multilingual education and the educators that come together. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to connect and find unity across the entire globe. And so I encourage everyone to go fill your baskets doing that. It would be fantastic.
Awesome.
Well, Dr. Paul Parkerson, thank you so much for being here. It was really nice to have you as a guest on Cultural Connections Lab. Thanks for coming to the conference today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Gracias, Paul.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. Adios.